Good afternoon, Camden Catholic. We're kind of coming back from what we talked about today about Napoleon in class, and we're going to continue with the reign of Napoleon. Now, we haven't gotten to his reign yet. We haven't gotten to when he actually assumed complete control over France. However, we did stop right here when we talked about how he wanted to attack Britain economically and attack their colonies. Now, well, we know he overran Egypt. We know that he feared disaster and left, but let's talk about how he went from consul to emperor and actually began to control these new estates. Sorry, there's a kid looking at me out my window like I'm weird. So, whatever, we'll move on though. Now, so when Napoleon returned to France from Egypt, a change in power was underway. Okay. Now remember what group had assumed control following the revolution? It's a five-man executive branch. Good job, Annie Hatch. The Directory, right? Now, was the Directory effective? I heard you over there, Gabby. Good job. No, or Ella, excuse me. No, it wasn't, right? It was not effective at all. So he used the army to overthrow the Directory and establish a new three-person executive branch that he called his consulate, right? Oddly very mirroring Julius Caesar, which kind of freaks me out. Like I said, I think he's the reincarnated version of him. So anyway, now, so this is Napoleon in his older years. He's looking a little pudgy. Not very good for him, right? Now, the consul, the consulate had democratic principles, voting rights. However, Napoleon is going to seize power for himself and name himself the first consulate, right? Now, why would he do this? Why would he slowly step his way into a monarchy? Well, remember, the revolution rebelled against a monarchy, right? They revolted against the former monarchy. France was still very fearful of another monarchy coming in, right? Because that old regime took so much advantage of the bourgeois, the rural peasants, and the urban workers. So he had to slowly integrate himself into it. Now, he's going to go from being the first consulate, and then he's going to eventually seize power as the emperor, right? This is a picture of Napoleon at his coronation. Well, obviously, who's right here wearing having the stick in his hand with a goofy-looking hat? That's the Pope, right? And then as you can see, Napoleon, well, wait a minute. Why does Napoleon standing on high over the Pope? Why is Napoleon also holding the crown over him? Why is his wife bowing to him? And why does the Pope look so angry? Well, turns out what happened is in 1804, Napoleon seized on his popularity and wrote a new constitution for France, right? In which he was called the Emperor of France, right? And it was unanimously approved. So obviously the people of France are really enjoying him. Now, real quick, Napoleon might not have been the best person in the world, but he was the one that France needed at the time to get back to even ground, right? So through their revolution, they went up and then they came back down again, right? They needed him to balance themselves back out because the revolution has really just ended probably in 1801, 1802, right? The early 1800s, 1790s. So anyway, he is now, instead of consul, he's now considered the Emperor of France. Now, as you can see, his wife down here, Josephine, she's down there kneeling. He wasn't really a very pro-feminist kind of cat. Now, we'll talk about a lot of reasons why because I don't want to waste our time on this flip and I don't want to hold y'all up for too long, but we'll talk about that later on. Now, Napoleon invited the Pope to Notre Dame to take part in the coronation, right? Well, this is kind of reminiscent of, what's that concept again, where the Catholic Church used to claim superiority over Pope. You cut me off. Sorry, Coffee. Good job. Papal supremacy, right? So this kind of is very mirrors that concept, right? Well, the thing about it is, remember, French people are still devoutly Catholic for the bulk, right? Now, what happened, though, to try and show, Napoleon did this as a trick, to try and show his superiority at the last minute before the Pope placed the crown on his head. He stood up, yanked it out of his hands, and put it on his own head, and then asked the Pope to leave Notre Dame, right? Big move, right? He was trying to show that he was controlled by no man, no church, right? He is the head of the French state. So, first thing he's going to do is he's going to write a new code of law, right? A lot like Hammurabi and a lot like Justinian, a lot like those other guys, right? So the Napoleonic Code was a code that was a reform of civil law in France. It would eventually spread to the rest of Europe. A lot of really good things about the Napoleonic Code that really appeased the former Third Estate, right? Well, first and foremost, it safeguarded all forms of property, right? Number two, employment was based on your talent, not on who you knew. No more nepotism, right? Not on who you were born, like who your dad was, who your uncle was, or anything like that. It was based more along the lines of how good you were at something. Merit was based on pay, pay was based on your merit. Sorry about that. So you got paid more the better job you did, right? Great things. Well, then we start getting into some dicey stuff. Workers' organizations were forbidden. That, I think, is a little sketchy. Workers need protection from their employers. Men were granted extensive control of their families. Whoa. Can we see some more of these sexist qualities of Napoleon, right? And divorce was made nearly impossible for women, right? So we'll talk more about like his sexist views and et cetera later on. But for example, his wife's name wasn't even Josephine, right? Josephine was a name that he gave her because her name was actually Marie Rose. And he said, I don't like that name. I like Josephine. That's your name now. He also forced his stepdaughter, Josephine's daughter from a former marriage, to marry his brother. Ooh. So anyway, now, Napoleon's empire, though. Napoleon could bring together as many as 700,000 troops at one time, right? He would also risk as many 100,000 in a single battle, endure heavy losses, and then come back to fight again. Because remember, he believed in overwhelming force, right? He wants to win one big battle every single time, and really just he wants a very short, quick war. He doesn't want it to be drawn out. So, no single enemy could match Napoleon's resources, all right? Even allied countries failed. So, continuing with his empire, though, no matter what. So Napoleon is traipsing his way across Europe. He takes over a lot of German principalities. He invades Spain in 1808 from 1808 to 1812 and makes his brother the new king of Spain. He invades a large portion of Italy. He invades a portion of the Balkans. Like, he has taken over almost the entire continent of Europe. But who is over across the English Channel laughing at him? The British, right? So he devises a plan called the Continental System, right? The Continental System is a system that literally forced the British Navy to, forced the British Navy to forbid any type of conquered nations to trade with Britain, right? They wanted to keep anybody from trading with the British, okay? So they wanted to basically cripple Britain through their wallet again, right? Very, very simple. Now, let's continue going forward, though. Why would he call it the Continental System? Exactly right, Miss Annie Miles over there in the back. I heard you. Because he controlled most of the continent of Europe, and he wanted to forbid them from trading with that island next door, England, right? So, anyway, now, here's the thing, though. The Continental System was a complete failure, right? The British economy actually survived because they traded with their colonies in North and South America. Because Britain was like, well, screw you guys, I don't want what you have anyway. Why would they also want what North and South America had? Exactly. They wanted to actually commandeer those raw materials and use new advents of the Industrial Revolution to create them into something, okay? So, now, many of Napoleon's economic policies favored only France, which angered a lot of conquered areas in the empire. So, now let's talk about the fall of Napoleon, right? Obviously, you can see what's one big reason behind his fall. He's an idiot and he tried to invade Russia during the winter, all right? So anyway, now, Russia did not like the changes that Napoleon was bringing to Europe, okay? So, in 1810, Russia withdrew themselves from the Continental System and said, screw you guys, we're not a part of your little dinky empire, we're going to do whatever we want. So they prepared for war, though, all right? They knew that Napoleon was coming because they knew that this was crippling this economic system he came up with. So here's the thing, though. Napoleon was determined to end the Russian military threat. So he assembled his Grand Army, right? His Grand Army, how many people do you think it had in it? 600,000. Right? The core of them trained French soldiers and soldiers from the rest of the empire. So, Napoleon is showing up to Russia with cannons, soldiers, cavalry, training, guns, winter uniforms, all this other stuff, right? So, well, the thing about Russia is it's huge, but not a lot of people live out there, okay? So, the Russian army only had 160,000 people in it, right? Very, very small. Napoleon wanted to just go in there and win one big battle and knock them out real fast. Well, the problem was scorched earth, okay? The Russians came up with this phenomenal idea of attacking the French and then retreating, and as they retreated, they would burn all of the supplies left, forcing Napoleon further and further and further into Russia during the wintertime, right? Now, what's going to happen, though, is the supply lines are too long to be maintained, so the French army isn't going to be resupplied, and a lot of them are going to freeze to death, all right? So the Russians defeated Napoleon because the French were not prepared to fight during the Russian winter. Funny little cool fact is that, oops, sorry about that. Little cool fact about this whole campaign is Russians, or not Russians, but the French actually were the first army to be commissioned with 10 canned food, right? Rations and tin cans. Well, the thing about the tin though is they had a lot left over, so they made a lot of the French buttons or the jackets on the French military, the winter jackets. Their buttons were made from tin. The problem with tin though is it gets very, 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 very brittle when it gets cold. So they were snapping off and they were breaking. So there was a lot of French soldiers clutching themselves for warmth, and many of them died from frostbite and freezing to death. Napoleon returned home with only 100,000 of the original 600,000 men. Well, the French people are going to be very upset about this. So after the Russian campaign, Napoleon was overthrown. And then what did they do to him to insult him the most? They turned him over to his most hated enemy. They gave him to the British, right? So, and he was exiled. Sorry about that. Wait. He was exiled to the island of Elba by the British. Craziest thing happened, though. The 100 Days, right? Because Napoleon doesn't stay anywhere for long. Napoleon actually waited until Britain was weak and eventually escaped the island of Elba and tried to return and conquer France. And the 100 Days was the time period in which Napoleon escaped from Elba and reclaimed control of France, right? Just for 100 days, though, so less than a year. Now, he was finally defeated at Waterloo, at the Battle of Waterloo, and he was sent into exile once again on the island of St. Helena, where he died, okay? So, but here's the thing, going forward. Some of you are thinking I'm kind of just brushing over Napoleon. We'll talk a lot more about him in class tomorrow. This man, honestly, is probably the most influential person that ever hit Europe. I think Hitler is, yes, a figure that really made some noise. I think Churchill is. I think Charlemagne. I think Clovis is. But everything when it comes to foreign relations following this era of 1799 to 1815 when he was in charge, everything was by proxy of him. Like, it's insane, and we'll talk more about it as we go. The Latin American revolutions, the German unification under his grandson, or his grandnephew, excuse me. Like, all this other stuff. But we'll talk about it tomorrow, don't worry. But he is a very influential figure. All right, so I'll see y'all tomorrow. I'm checking this flip, by the way. I'll see y'all then. Have a good one.